What's up, Internet? You're tuned into a very special presentation of the FlipScreen Games podcast, where we are talking about the news that Assassin's Creed Shadows has been delayed by several months to February 14th from its originally planned November 15th release date. And it seems like it might be, the sign of some troubled times over at Ubisoft.
Yes, I think we knew this was potentially happening because there was supposed to be like a big press preview that was coming out, or that was meant to happen, that was cancelled or postponed. I think they also pulled their entire TGS showing for it's Ubisoft just completely pulled everything. I think they are a bit worried about putting it out right now, considering we've just had Star Wars Outlaws maybe sort of whimper out, and there were some issues at launch, and I think people are sort of not taken to it too hard. And we can see here they've said during there's like an investor briefing, they said that it had didn't hit like they wanted it to. They their profits didn't quite get where they wanted it to hit. And yeah, I think they're probably like, well, we can't have this again. We need to do something about it.
Yeah, right. Like they specifically cited weak performance from Star Wars Outlaws, and then like a lower than expected profit for the quarter as being the reasons that they decided to delay it. So I mean, very transparent from them about how they feel about it, which is, I think, a positive thing. I think Ubisoft is a very easy target, especially these days. But I do want to applaud them for being transparent about what's going on, and that they're trying to right the ship. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of the latest in a long line of unforced errors from them, and that was what I thought would be interesting to touch on a little bit here, because there's a few more details for the story itself. So here's what Ubisoft had to say specifically. While the game is feature complete, the learnings from the Star Wars Outlaws release led us to provide additional time to further polish the title. This will enable the biggest entry in the franchise to fully deliver on its ambition, notably by fulfilling the promise of our dual protagonist adventure, with Noe and Yusuke bringing two very different gameplay styles. And they also announced that Shadows is going to be available on Steam day and date, which is something that is a departure from their recent release strategy, where rather than having the kind of standard season pass model with Ubisoft, where it's going to come out here, there'll be a season pass, then it comes to PC and we get kind of another opportunity. It's going to be their day and date, and everyone who pre-orders the game will get the first expansion for free.
Yeah, it seems a little bit like they are they want people in. They want people in.
It feels like they're trying to be aggressive about making it a big part of their their financials for the year.
Yes, they definitely learned from their mistakes. I think when I remember when Prince of Persia: Lost Crown came out at the start of the year, they were reporting, the game didn't do all that well despite it being received very well. Game was really great. Large part of that could have been down to it not being on Steam on PC, so people maybe chose to play it, either not play it at all, or wait for it to come to Steam, or didn't play it at all, or they were waiting for a sale, as often happens as well.
I think that's got to be it, right? That was a huge motivating factor. That I think they probably realized the game would have been a lot more successful if it was there at launch and it was able to have a bigger number of people playing it and talking about it.
Yes, and maybe this decision comes because not saying Prince of Persia is the whole reason for it, but Prince of Persia came out on Steam, I don't know, a couple of months ago now, 2 months ago at this point maybe. They might have seen a big enough increase in that they were like, oh shit, okay, this worked. Because Star Wars Outlaws is now also announced for PC, so instead of being like a 6-month thing or a 7-month thing, whatever the case may be, it's happening much sooner than that. And now Assassin's Creed is launching day and date, so it seems like they're recognizing that Steam is the place to be, which I hope they do decide to lean less on the Ubisoft launcher, because it's a frustrating piece of software to use.
I think they need to just move on from it. If it's something that you want to maintain, just for your hardcore audience, then that's one thing. But trying to force people to go on your proprietary launcher just feels like such an old-fashioned thing at this point. We did a whole episode about that on the Steam Deck podcast, and how it's just it's clear that your game performs worse on a key market if you don't have it on Steam day and date. And it just is like, it's not worth whatever you think the trade-off is for that, right?
Yeah, like is it better? We spoke about this before, like about Epic Games as well. Is it better to have to give 30% of your sales, or to keep that 30% of less sales? You know, if that makes sense.
Right, exactly. And I think, you and I had an episode about that in the context of like the deals that Epic had been signing going away, and that was the thing that was the incentive. That was the argument I would always make, is like, it is worth it if it paid for the development of your game, but otherwise, no, it's not, right? Yeah. There's no reason to do that. And I did think you brought up Star Wars Outlaws and kind of the their current efforts to, I guess, apply a tourniquet and save this game, right, and right the ship. And I thought this was interesting as well about how transparent they are being about how much it's been a disappointment. They said that there were, quote, softer than expected sales for Star Wars Outlaws. And they said that they have development teams that are, quote, currently fully mobilized to swiftly implement a series of updates to polish and improve player experience in order to engage a large audience during the holiday season to position Outlaws as a strong long-term performer.
I will say the reason they're being so transparent is probably because they're saying this to investors.
Oh, yeah.
They need a reason. So I don't know if it's transparency for like a
for its own sake.
Like, hey, yeah, we get it. This is like, oh, we know we're not doing very well. Here's our strategy for like, don't sell. Here's what we're gonna do. Your money is fine. It's yeah.
I think
they have to do this.
I think particularly with that explanation, that like very much I think rings hollow, because based on what the critiques that I've read of Outlaws that pushed me away from the game, it had a lot less to do with like moment-to-moment gameplay or any of those things. Not to say that those things were good, because it sounds like they're by and large pretty mediocre. But a lot of people were just talking about how the story was underdeveloped, and that there's not a good, strong emotional core, and that there's like the that droid character that's like prominently featured on the art and is like was sold as like her best friend is like a character that doesn't have that much dialogue and things like that. And it's like those are things that an updater is just not going to fix.
Yeah. Did you not play this then?
No, I was very excited about it, but once it dropped and I heard so much conversation about how there was just nothing to the story, I decided against it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones like, you just get a feeling. You just get a feeling about a game, and like every time you spoke about it, every time that I saw a trailer for it, there was just that in the back of my head of like, this isn't going to hit. This isn't going to be. Whereas when I and that I thought that might have been just a Star Wars thing. But then when I saw like Jedi Survivor, I'm like, give me some of that. Fill me up, Cal. But now with this, I never got any of that. I always had like a niggling feeling, and I think I'm still getting that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think my thought on it, right? Because like Steve and I were very excited about it, right? And like I did think it showed well, but it was very much me going into it with this expectation of like, I think that like if this game is similar to what I got out of Guardians of the Galaxy from Crystal Dynamics a couple years ago, that would be great, right? If this is like a game that's like, it's like a 7.5, but if you like the IP, the characters are good, it's a fun story, like that was what I was expecting to get out of it, right? And the fact that it's like, well, no, it has a bad story and weak, underdeveloped gameplay. It's like, well, then what is there here beyond the fact that it's Star Wars? And I'm not a Star Wars fan like that. I like Star Wars, right? If you're watching on YouTube, you can probably see a droid behind me over here. I got a BD unit up there behind my basketball. He's hiding
I see it. I've got.
You got a BD one over there too, right?
BD one up there, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, I like Star Wars, but I'm not going to sit through something mediocre just because it's Star Wars. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. In fact, I probably hold it to a higher regard, because it's like, well, if you're going to do something in an IP, it needs to, or not harder, I'm judging it more harshly is what I mean to say.
Yeah.
Because it's like, like, if you're going to tell a Star Wars story, like, that means something. It's supposed to feel a certain way. It's supposed to, elicit a certain feeling. And it's like, if you can't even nail down there being a strong cast of characters, then what are we doing here? So with that in mind, I wanted to pose a question to you.
Hit me up.
Do you think that Ubisoft is in real trouble right now? Or is this something that, can be a wake-up call for them, right? And that they can look at this last couple years of games and make an adjustment, right? And approach development in a different way. Because I think, something I just to give you a little context, dear listener, I took a look at this whole console generation, right? And I itemized like the big major releases from Ubisoft, and with very, very rare exception, games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which was a game that sold very well and also had a pretty, not an insane critical reception, but a solid one. It's got an 80 on Metacritic, right? That's a good game by that metric. Most of their big releases have underperformed either commercially or critically or both. And there are a few examples here of games that had middling or outright bad reviews this generation. Watch Dogs Legions, Far Cry 6, Riders Republic, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Extraction, Skull and Bones, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, and Assassin's Creed Mirage are all games that are in that neighborhood of 75 or lower, right? And then games that were more critically successful, but that Ubisoft themselves said underperformed. Mortals Phoenix Rising, Prince of Persia, Mario plus Rabbids, Sparks of Hope. And you talked about Lost Crown earlier. It was a game that got a lot of good reception, but they talked about how it didn't make as much money as they hoped. And that was the exact same thing with Mario plus Rabbids. They said they released it during a quarter where there was too much going on, and it got lost in the shuffle, and it failed to meet expectations. And Immortals Phoenix Rising was a game that, reviewed okay and sold okay, and they thought it could be a game that started off a new franchise, and it doesn't really seem like that's something that they're going to continue on.
No, they've left it. I think we hear far too often, and we've been hearing for the last 5 years too much of, specifically from Ubisoft, failed to meet expectations, didn't meet expectations, blah, blah, blah. And I think it speaks to Ubisoft has, budgets that are too big, too many releases a year, too many franchises. They're a big AAA developer. I get that. They do a lot of releases. But when you look at this last year, and you've got Skull and Bones, Star Wars Outlaws. Was Avatar this year or was that last year?
I don't remember if that was earlier this year, if it was at the end of last year, but I would say it's within this fiscal year. So if you want to lump that in, that's fine.
Yeah, I think right. And then Assassin's Creed has been delayed. It was December. It was December last year, so we're very close. I think it's just they've not had. They're only properly this is a great game, this is a well-reviewed game, was Prince of Persia: Lost Crown, and it didn't sell very well. So I think they need to evaluate what the hell they're doing, because their stock is taking a hit at the moment. It's really not doing very well. I think they're going to burn their bridges with their core audience, with their investors, and also just with the people who, I don't want to be dismissive of Ubisoft or people that like their games, but it is it's like the popcorn movie of games almost, where it's what you're getting, you get it because it's comfortable, you get it because it's what you're you can't be confused, you can't be surprised, you can't be disappointed, because it's just I spend £70, whatever it is, and I get a big long game that can take me forever. And it's those people who maybe don't buy games the way that we do, or engage with games as much as we do,
right,
because they don't have the budget for it, or they'd rather play a few games a year instead of loads of games a year. And I think they need to evaluate. I think they need to evaluate what they're going to do to not alienate that audience. Sorry, my nose is really bunged, and also not just alienate everyone really. And it does feel like that's the case.
Yeah, because I think for me the thing I always come back to, right, when people take shots at Ubisoft, is that I think that there have been periods of time where the games or the style of games that they were making, right, regardless of how you feel about them, there was quality to them, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think even if that type of game is not to your taste, I think most people that don't have an axe to grind can admit that there are a handful of Assassin's Creed games that in a vacuum are good games, and that, that Far Cry 3 was one of the best games the year it came out, right? People loved Far Cry 4. It's not like Ubisoft, I think, has ever been incapable of turning in things that were quality, but I do think that there was like this argument of like, maybe they're not being like as much depth as you want in some of the games, or that there was this tendency for them to just like kind of turn in a mediocre creative effort in terms of like just cashing in on the same ideas, even if the quality is there. And I think that, to your example of like a big like popcorn budget movie, right, is like, well, yeah, I think that's all well and good when you're talking about, the like, okay, to stick with that metaphor, Jaws is a blockbuster popcorn movie, right? The Empire Strikes Back is a blockbuster popcorn movie, but they're also good.
Yes.
And I think that, I would maintain that things like Far Cry 3, right, things like the Ezio trilogy of Assassin's Creed, right, or like even something later like Black Flag, right, like there are games from them that have a high quality and a at least a middling level of aspiration for something greater than what's come before. And
so you listed 3 games that came out 10 years ago or more.
Exactly. and that's exactly my point, is that I think when you look at these recent efforts, right, a lot of them are just like, well, what if we cashed in on this same game that was groundbreaking and successful 10 years ago, and we made a bigger, more bloated version of it, or we made a smaller, tighter version of it with less heart and less character and less, novelty at the very least, right? Because it's like, yeah, like in theory, an Assassin's Creed game that gets back to its roots and everything is like interesting on paper, but like, are we just burnt out on that at this point, right? It's like we've had how many of these games over the last, 15 years or whatever, right? Where it's like, is enough? And I think that there are some franchises like Assassin's Creed that like maybe that is the case, and we just need to like let it go for a little while and reboot it and try to breathe new life into it in the same way that they did with like Origins, right? And they got a whole new trilogy of games out of that were all critically well received and sold pretty well and great. But yeah, it's like we're back to a point where it's like, well, one just came out last year. Now there's yet another one coming out, and it's like, it's we need more innovation and more like trying to, I think, experiment and try new things at the very least. But I mean, if you're not going to do that, if you are just going to be like, well, we're going to make Far Cry, but it's Avatar, it's like, yeah, okay, but like that game can't just be a 7. It's got to be an 8, right? It's got to at least hit a certain bar of quality to make people want to buy into that more, simplistic formula that you talked about. Because I think that, I've made the argument and I'll make the argument again. When that formula is done well, it hits and people like it. Not everybody, but a lot of people. You brought up earlier, or not earlier on this episode, on the main show this week, where we were talking about the PlayStation event. Ghost of Tsushima and Spider-Man, and like these are games that follow that formula, but guess what? They're good, and the art's good, and there's a good cast of characters, and they have interesting side quests, and your mileage may vary on if you want to do 100% of those things, but the core 20, 30 hour experience that most people have with those games are extremely well received and beloved, and there's no reason that that formula in Ubisoft's hands should turn out games that are unremarkable, right? And it's like a $70 game that's a 7, when there are like 3 or 4 other games that came out this year, maybe some of which even in the same genre, that are an 8 or a 9, and it's like,
and that's $70 at the very minimum, whereas it can go up to over 100. That Ubisoft are famous for overcomplicating and having loads of loads of content, loads of support for this stuff that costs a lot of money. It's
season passes and cosmetics and all that stuff. And I think all of those things are just another thing that kind of like puts puts people off, right? And it's like, I'm sure that there are probably a lot of gamers that might enjoy Assassin's Creed Origins or Valhalla or, the one that's in Greece that I can't think of, Odyssey, but have just never taken the plunge because they have a bad taste in their mouth for, Assassin's Creed or Ubisoft's tendencies or whatever, right? And it's like, I think that, to your point, yeah, I think they really need to have a reckoning of like where are their budgets going, what are they prioritizing, and like more content, right, is not always the answer, or like a tighter, shorter game, right, like should also probably be cheaper, or should really, really try to take creative swings, right, and end up with something like Valiant Hearts from them, right, which was like an interesting creative indie game. And it's like, obviously that's not going to make the money that something like Assassin's Creed will, but being willing to take creative risks with your IP is like what's going to lead to you getting exciting new games that people really want to come and spend time with, like Prince of Persia, right? Like that was a unique way to re-envision and bring back a franchise that has a lot of love and has a lot of name recognition. Yeah. But they didn't do it by cashing in and making a boring Assassin's Creed clone. They made a cool, dynamic, new idea.
Yeah, I would like them to do more because, Mario plus Rabbids was one of my favorite sort of Ubisoft games before Prince of Persia came out, because it was like driven by someone who had an idea and a vision to want to create something, not we have to make another game in this franchise to be profitable. It was like, there's obviously the element of being profitable, but it's also like, we had an idea, we believe in this, we want to create something. And you can feel it. You can feel it in the way they talk about the game. You can feel it in the way the game is, that it's not just by committee, made for profit,
Yeah, and that's where I think, they've kind of found themselves in this really, I think, undesirable position, right? Of like, they're making stuff that I think the goal, right, is to make something that is mass market and that is mass appeal, but it's so bland in its execution that it ends up appealing to nobody. And like, a game can't just be a bland, inoffensive 7, like that's not enough. And when it's worse than that, then it's like, I mean, come on, guys, like they've turned in, now 4 years worth of pretty unremarkable efforts. And, I don't mean to say that there wasn't effort put into those games. I'm sure there are people there trying to make a great game, but whether it's, issues with budgets or timeline or trying to juggle too many projects and not being able to, dedicate more resources to giving a game more time to incubate, or a better, like having a better like foundation before you move forward on an idea. It's like, I think something like Immortals Phoenix Rising is a great example of like, okay, well, like, why didn't that game get a sequel? Why didn't you get another at bat to see if this could become something, rather than taking a swing on something original and then immediately backing off of it when it wasn't a massive hit? Whereas like, you're so happy to go back to the well of the Assassin's Creeds and the Far Cries, even if they're mediocre and they're damaging a brand that used to be strong, that used to mean something, right? Like Assassin's Creed used to be one of the biggest brands in video games, and now it feels like this kind of like lumbering dinosaur that has outlived its cultural cachet.
Yeah, they sort of become, when something like that comes around, it's like, oh, this is really interesting, this is really unique, and then eventually you see it become like, oh, okay, it's another one of those, like, yeah, we get it, all right, Grandad, another Assassin's Creed, yeah, great, okay, and it's sort of like, when you don't do something interesting with it, or when it becomes like it has to get bigger to keep making money, or it becomes bloated, and it's now just a bloated, it looks like what it used to look like, but it's not quite, whereas something like Zelda's been able to do interesting, unique things.
Exactly. Yeah, and like that is, I think, Ubisoft's like biggest failure, is like not properly managing their IP, right? And like the whole like, we're gonna sell you Assassin's Creed every year until you stop buying them. It's like, that's not a smart way to do business. It's like you need to maintain the value of an IP so that when it comes out, it feels like an event and it feels like this thing you want to be a part of and that it's a big sacred moment. And that's never going to happen when there was another Assassin's Creed that I didn't play and forgot existed 12 months ago.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, who knows? I think I would love to see them right the ship, because I do think that when they turn in good efforts, like there are plenty of Ubisoft games that I've enjoyed, but I mean, by and large, I think that their efforts have gotten less and less inspired, and I wouldn't be surprised if there comes a point in the near future where they end up, having another entity like aggressively trying to acquire them again, right? And that they are going to just become a piece in somebody else's portfolio.
Yeah, we spoke about this last year, didn't we? I think about like, are Ubisoft going to get bought by Xbox or something like that? And I was of the opinion that no, but like the more they keep releasing games, the more it's like at some point they're going to have to do something, because their stock keeps going down.
Yeah,
so
they can't just keep spending the same amount of money to make games that nobody is particularly interested in playing or talking about.
Yeah, because I mean, hey, as we know, the guy from Far Cry says, Madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. He says that in Far Cry 3. That's what Ubisoft are doing, is the very clever point I was making there.
Well, that's what we'll leave it here for today. Let us know what you guys think. Were you looking forward to Assassin's Creed Shadows? How do you feel about Ubisoft's efforts over the last couple of years? And if you're somebody who has enjoyed their games in the past, how do you see them riding the ship moving forward? And if you're somebody who their games have never spoken to you, do you think that that's something that can be fixed at this point? Or is it just, are they too broken? Thank you guys for joining us here on a very special presentation of the FlipScreen Games podcast. Remember, go check out this week's show proper, where we talked about the PlayStation Presents event and the reveal, I should say, of a new sequel to Ghost of Tsushima. I am so excited about that. If you want to go hear that conversation, make sure you check it out. Check out our sister shows, the Nintendo Noise podcast and the Steam Deck podcast. However you choose to get involved or show your support, thank you for joining us on another special episode of this show. I've been Pete. He's been Max. We'll see you next week.
Bye.